Hey guys, what's up? It's Jordan here. So I kind of wanted to do a video on the Canon EOS Rebel SL3's low-light capabilities. So I did some test footage in 4K. So one thing I just kind of want to make really quick. The 4K capabilities are capped out at 6400 ISO, so you can't expand it past 6400 if you're shooting in 4K. Now if you shoot in 1080p, you can go all the way up to 25,600. So just something to keep in mind, especially if you're trying to do like a really low light shoot. You might probably not want to use anything past 6400, and we'll go ahead and get into the video here in a little bit. I shot all of these videos at 4K at 50 millimeters at f1.4, and I tried to keep the shutter speed all the same throughout. So I actually wound up using ND filters, and I know that sounds crazy, especially shooting in a dark low light situation indoors, but the main reason why I used ND filters was because the higher I went in ISO, the brighter the image got, and I didn't want to close the aperture down anymore because I was trying to keep this as fair as possible. So what I noticed, ISO 100, 200, and 400, there was literally no noise in any of those. Once you start to get into the 400, there's a slight bit of grain in the video, although it's not necessarily noticeable, at least to maybe some people that aren't really looking for like pixelation in the video. At ISO 800, you do notice it a little bit. It's not terrible, it's still a usable image. At 1600, it's a little bit more noticeable unless you're pixel peeping. Most people probably wouldn't notice it. Like, I'm filming this right now at 4K 24 at 1600 ISO at 1/50th of a second, and so I don't know if you maybe notice in the video itself if there's any noise. If you do, let me know in the comments, but I was pixel peeping the videos before recording this, and I did slightly notice some. Once you raise the ISO up to 3200 in 4K, you do start to notice the noise more. Same goes with 6400, which is where it caps out at. So basically, if you're shooting in 4K, you want to try to keep it around 1600, at least for my personal preference. Now, if you're shooting in a really low light situation and you need to bump it up to 3200 ISO, you will notice the noise, but that's not to say it's still not usable. Probably something that you shouldn't use like on like a professional basis. Maybe if you're just doing like a project, maybe the noise is something that you want in your image to give it kind of like a almost vintage style like horror film feel, maybe. So personal taste. I try to stay at least at 1600 or below. I try not to go past 1600, although I have used 3200 in the past. So now we move on to the expanded. So the other videos that I've shot were in 1080. So basically anything past 6400 has to be shot at 1080p, and I'm not really sure why, but I guess maybe because the way that Canon uses the 4K crop uses portions of the sensor, not the full sensor. I don't necessarily think that anybody would probably want to use anything past 6400 even at 1080. So at 12,800 you definitely really notice the noise, and obviously with the expanded up to 25,600, I mean pretty much like I said, anything past 6400 you're really going to notice noise. Maybe that's something that you're going for. Maybe you kind of want that like film grain look. That's totally a personal interpretation of how you want your videos to look. I think it's disgusting, but that's just me. Now for photos, I did the same thing. I kept all of the focal length the same, so I shot all the photos at 50 millimeter f1.4, with the only exception was ISO 100. I actually had to bump it down to 1/40th of a second. There wasn't enough light to hit the sensor that I actually had to take a flashlight and hold it above the little Lego guy. So to get it to where it was kind of almost in the same ballpark as 1/50th, I bumped it up to 1/40th of a second and took the photo. Now for all these photos and stuff, I didn't really do anything post-processing to remove any sort of noise, and I didn't use any sort of lens profile correction. I think the only thing that I really did for those photos was maybe turn down some of the highlights in the photos just because maybe they're a little blown out. I don't really think that if I remember correctly, I didn't mess with any of the shadows or blacks or whites or anything. So, but basically ISO 100, 200, and 400. So ISO 100 and 200 were perfectly fine. You didn't really notice any noise. ISO 400 was pretty minimal. I didn't really, like, unless you're zooming in a lot on the photo, especially just how I was shooting, I didn't really notice a whole lot of noise, but it could be a possibility that maybe you might notice some, especially in like darker scene situations. Like basically what I was doing is I was shooting against a black background on a wooden table with the lights right next to the Lego guy to get him as bright as possible. You'll also notice some chromatic aberration around him. I used the Canon f1.4 50mm lens. Like I said, I didn't add any sort of denoise and I didn't use any lens profile correction. So at ISO 800, you do start to notice a little bit of noise into the image, and then same goes for 1600. The noise is a little bit more noticeable at 1600. And then basically anything 3200 all the way up to expanded 51,000 and 200, you definitely notice the noise a lot. I mean, basically there's no way around that unless you're just adding a lot of noise reduction in post, so it's something to keep in mind. I do a lot of like astrophotography. I try not to go above 1600 just because I know that the sensor on this, I mean, you're really going to notice the noise. With the processor, the Digic 8 processor that Canon uses, it's a good processor, but it's just Canon has never really necessarily been known for their low light performance, so just take that into account. If you're going to be using this for like any sort of videos that you're going to be using for like low light situations or photos for low light situations, I wouldn't say that it's the best. A lot of post-processing work will have to go into making the images usable, although I can't say that, I mean, if you're shooting at 1600 or 3200, you're going to notice the noise. You're going to have to add a lot of denoise in post, so just keep that in mind. If you guys like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, also give it a thumbs up. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit all the buttons. I'm Jordan, and I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.